We want Mashiach now. Welcome back to another video. I just wanted to give a succulent Chinese disclaimer before we started that this video is not, God forbid, in the slightest way, trying to excuse or justify or give you reasons why Israel is in existence and why the Jews are living in their land. Because, as you know, as a great Mona Lisa used to say, I am because I am. And very simply, the reason that we're living in this land is because we bought, conquered, and lived in this land because God gave it to us for thousands of years. Meaning, it all starts back, obviously, with the fact that God gave us this land. So the physical reason why it's our land is because it is. But more importantly very interestingly, is the spiritual aspect of this. Because, of course, Judaism is a religion. Now, the land of Israel is mentioned in the Tanakh, in the complete Bible. Israel, like the land of Israel, 700 times, 699. The Sion, which is really going on, Jerusalem, or the land of Israel as a whole, is mentioned together with the land of Israel close to 1,000 times. Which does seem to be a very mysterious type of thing for a religion, in other words, for a God, to be so fixated on a portion of land. Meaning, the very simple complaint would be, which is logical, is that if you're a people and your religion, so you have your book, that constitutes your religion. But why on earth would a spiritual God, who there's so many laws in Judaism, how far we go just to say that God is unlimited and therefore the most spiritual being without any physical connotations, why on earth would he choose? And honestly, the whole Bible is, in other words, in a certain sense, just a story of Jews coming to Israel. Abraham becomes the first Jew. God promises him Israel for his descendants as an eternal inheritance. The Jews go down into Egypt. God rescues them and starts a long journey to bring them to Israel. The Torah then ends off with the Jews going into Israel and Moses not being able to fulfill his final destiny of going into Israel. In other words, the point there is a very simple question, which is that if you're a religion, which means that you're spiritual, then keep your hands on the spiritual and stay far away. You best stay far away from any land. Your land doesn't make you a people. It's your religion. It's the fact that you're a nation, which your nation is because of your religion. And in other words, keep the spirituality and the physicality as they are, separate. Don't mix the two. Don't tell me that God suddenly wanted a portion of land, and especially look at Israel. A few blocks from here is where the Holy Temple stood, the first two. The third is soon to be rebuilt. And it's the idea of the Holy Temple isn't just a temple where we pray to God. We say this is God's home in this world, which seems to be a very strange thing. In other words, what we're here to figure out is why would a spiritual God choose a physical plot of land? To explain this, we got to get to what the actual Bible and the Hasidic philosophers and the Talmud and the Zohar says about the land of Israel. In other words, find out about the land of Israel from the religion of Judaism, because as we said, this land is not just a land, this is a land that God gave to the Jewish people. Now, there is a specific, how do you say pasuk in English? There's a specific verse in the Bible, which is said right in conjunction with the Jews entering the land of Israel, which is, which is that you should know this day and take it into your heart, which is the day of the Jews going into Israel, that Hashem, which is one of the names of God, who is Elohim, another name of God, which means God is your Lord, basically. And Ein Eid Movade, and there's nothing besides for him. First let's get to what the name of a God even is. We just mentioned two names of God in this pasuk, in this verse. The first name is Havaya. The second name is Elohim. Well, first, what does it mean that God has names? So the idea of God even having a name in the first place is the idea of a name just is a way to refer to someone, to refer to something. God doesn't actually have a name because God is completely above any terms or any way of referring to him, completely undefinable. But we do call him by his actions. So we call him Havaya, which stands for Hayahayavaviyah, which is that he is everlasting. He is past, present, and future, and he is something. In other words, the name Havaya shows on the level of God, which is completely above and unrelated to this world. The name Elohim, which is loosely translated as Lord, another name we got for God, is the same numerical value as the Hebrew word Hateva, which is nature. In other words, The name of Elohim is the way that God relates and is involved and is found in this world. In basic English, the name Elohim shows on concealment. The name Havaya shows on revelation. In a more general type of way, you could almost say that Havaya is above the world, the godliness above the world, and Elohim is the godliness in our world, to be able to create the physical world which seems to be separate from God. What we're saying in this pasuk is the God which is above this world, and the God which we know is so much above and so unlimited and so completely beyond any definition, is the same God as the God of the nature, as the same God that is found in this world, as the same God that is, so to speak, in a more limited type of way. Now, this is something very hard to understand because Havaya and Elohim is, by all terms and definitions, complete opposites. Havaya is the source of everything, and Elohim, which stands for nature, as we said, is basically the spiritual stopping flow, like stopping the revelation of godliness into this world. Like it says, Havaya is the level of almost pure, unfiltered godliness, and Elohim is what filters that to be able that after levels and levels and levels, you should be able to come to such a low level of godliness, so to speak, that you have a physical world. In other words, Havaya is the unfiltered, and Elohim's whole focus and whole existence is the fact that it filters and stops and conceals over Shem Havaya, over the name of Havaya, over this pure, unfiltered light of Havaya. So, in other words, this pasuk is coming, and this verse is coming and just stating that the filtered light and the light which stops the unfiltered light and the pure light of Havaya, which is complete godly revelation, which is completely stopped and concealed and fought by Elohim, is one. It seems to be saying that the revelation of God and the concealment of God in this world is one. Now, this is a massive topic in Kabbalah and Hasidus with the Kabbalistic masters, because it's one of the most important topics in the Torah, which is Eined Mavade, that there's nothing besides for God. So the Rebbe Rashab, the 5th Chabad Rebbe, speaks about this idea a few generations back, and he gives a beautiful illustration of how this would work. Take, for example, the fact that your brain thinks of a certain solution, a certain idea. So you're running based on a certain notion. When your brain comes up with something, you're running based on a certain notion. But there needs to be a limit to that notion. In other words, the second your brain passes and says, you know, I'm going with this idea that I thought of, and I'm going to go full blown. There is no stop. I'm taking this idea to the end. I'm going to go with the most extreme level of this idea, instead of saying, okay, this idea might be correct, but there must be a limit for the idea to be correct, because the second you pass that limit, it's no longer even true. His point is over here that you see that there is a certain idea that only through the stoppage of your brain could you accomplish a true thought process. Now, to take this logic a step further, when a teacher is teaching a subject and this teacher is brilliant, the only way for him to teach the subject is to contract his mind and say it slow and say it in brief, concise words. If you give your full brain flow that the teacher's got going on, no student will understand a word. In other words, the only way possible for the student to understand the words of the teacher is through the teacher contracting and concealing his brain flow. So in other words, there's two ways of looking at this contraction. Is it a revelation or is it a concealment? Well, it's a little bit of both. For the teacher, it's definitely not a concealment. The teacher knows in the words he's saying, he has the full thought process that he has in his brilliant mind. For the student, it may be a contraction, but for the student itself, if he studies the words of the teacher enough, in this brief, concise way that the teacher is teaching, he will understand, after studying it fully and for many hours, he'll understand the full breadth and depth of his teacher's logic and his teacher's knowledge. As the Vedas HaKedesh says, a Kabbalistic book, that the same God is the full capacity of everything. The same way God has a capacity of revelation, because he is unlimited, he has the same capacity for concealment. And here's the thing, it's the same godliness. It's the same God doing the same of these two actions. Just two different names of God. One's revelation, one's concealment, but it's the same exact God. So to steer back this conversation to Havaya and Elohim, yes, Elohim, the world, is a concealment on godliness, but through understanding the true, what the world really is, which the world is, Elohim is a concealment of godliness, but only so that we could be able to actually bring God into our life. Meaning, if God would give us the full-blown revelation of godliness, we would cease to exist. We wouldn't know what's going on. But when it comes through Elohim, that is the most true revelation of godliness. And not only that, not only is it not a contraction for God, who for him the world is always one with him, it's not a real contraction, but also it's not a contraction for us, because through studying the world and knowing the true nature of the world itself, the true nature of a stone and of a tree, which is being created every single second by godliness, and its whole existence, when you go to the core of it, is godliness, you could reach the level of understanding of God above the world. We could reach the level of complete godliness, the same level of godliness of above the world, the level of Havaya, through the level of Elohim, meaning through the concealment, you could reach and understand the revelation and the full godliness. Now, what's the point of all this? The point of all this is that God and the world are one. They're not two separate entities. Spiritual and physical are not two separate entities. And to the contrary, because God is one, because God is the only existence, he's not the only God, he's the only existence, period. Because everything in the world is created by God every single second, and this entire world inherently and at its source and what it really is, and the truth of it, is nothing but a revelation of godliness. Now, take this back to our story about Israel. Who was the first? This is very connected to Avraham Avinu, Abraham, the first Jew, who was the first connection to Israel, that God gave him the land of Israel for his descendants. This is exactly his message. His message wasn't that there's a God above the world. His message was that there's a God in this world who affects our life. Every single thing that happens is because that is the way it is meant to be, and there is a message in everything that happens. In other words, the whole point over here of a central point in Judaism is because God is one, therefore God is in this world, and everything we do in this world is could be a part of revealing that godliness in this world. Now, take this, and this is exactly what the beginning of the Bible starts off with. The Bible starts off with the story of creation, but the Bible is a book of commandments. Why are you starting off with the history, with the story of creation? So the first Rashi, Rab Shlomo Yitzchaki, the main commentator on the Bible, is an incredible, wild Rashi, which is the first Rashi on the Bible. He says, why do we start off with the story of creation instead of the commandments? He says, we start off because when people are going to say that you guys have stolen the land of Israel, in other words, meaning what? That you guys have stolen physical, you're breaching your line, you're bringing the spiritual into the physical, you're bringing heaven into earth. Stay in your zone, stay to physical, stay to spiritual, That's the reason, he says, exactly that's the reason why we start off with the story of the creation of the world. To say that God created this world and God chose to give the land of Israel to the Jews. Meaning what? Spiritually, God created this world, and this world is a revelation of godliness. This world and God are not two separate entities. To the contrary, they are one. So the whole point over here of a big portion of Judaism is the fact that God affects the world, is in the world, and physical and spiritual, heaven and earth, are not two separate entities. Now, if this is true, then Israel really becomes much more understood in the spiritual sense, because if God is in this world, there must be an epicenter of that godliness from which it spreads to the whole world, like you see with the land of Israel that brought God really to the whole world. So in other words, if God is if God is one, then God is touching the world, affecting the world, and he chose that the epicenter of where this is going to be from should be the land of Israel. And that's why he gave it to the first Jew who revealed this, Abraham and his descendants, as an eternal inheritance. And the message over here is, meaning the message of the land of Israel is that God and the world are one. So therefore God is with us and with everyone, and we want Mashiach now.